Title: The Silent Veteran. What happened in that courtroom changed everything. No one expected a paralyzed veteran to stand during sentencing, and yet what happened that day in a crowded Alabama courtroom left the judge speechless and the entire room in tears. The courtroom in Dothan was packed that morning, not because of the crime, but because of the man, Oswin Jarrett. People knew him as the quiet neighbor who handed out fruit to local kids, who raked the leaves from other people's lawns without being asked. A man who never raised his voice, who rolled through life in a wheelchair with quiet dignity. But now he sat before Judge Renata Greaves, expressionless, still, his eyes fixed ahead. Just a few benches behind him, his 15-year-old niece, Carlin, sat squeezed between her aunt and her school counselor, clutching her backpack like a shield. On the opposite side of the courtroom, the brother of the man Oswin had struck sat stone-faced, arms folded. A news crew from Mobile was quietly recording in the back. Everyone felt something was about to happen. They just didn't know what. Judge Greaves flipped through the sentencing documents with her usual calm precision, the kind that made people uneasy. She was known for being cold, not cruel, but immovable, like steel. The charge was second-degree assault after an altercation outside a grocery store. Oswin had no prior record, but the strike he delivered left the other man with a fractured cheekbone. The grainy footage had been reviewed. Shouting, movement, a glimpse of Oswin's chair. Then silence. Judge Greaves looked up and said clearly, "Mr. Jarrett, please rise." A hush fell over the room. People thought she had made a mistake. His public defender, Reggie Vallon, leaned toward the mic, hesitant. "Your Honor, Mr. Jarrett is paralyzed from the waist down. He can't stand." The judge didn't reply. Her eyes stayed on Oswin. He didn't ask why. He didn't flinch. He simply placed both hands on the arms of his chair. The sound of the tires shifting broke the silence. He pushed. His face clenched, not in anger but with effort. His arms trembled. His chest tightened. And slowly, inch by inch, he rose. Not fully, not steadily, but enough. Enough to say something that words never could. Then his legs gave out. He collapsed back into the seat. He didn't cry. He didn't complain. He just sat there, catching his breath. The courtroom was frozen. No coughing, no movement. Only the weight of that moment settling into everyone's chest. Judge Greaves didn't move either. Her lips pressed so tightly together that her chin began to tremble. And then she did something no one in Dothan had ever seen. She stood up, quietly removed her robe, and walked out of the courtroom. No one followed. No one dared speak. She was gone for only 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When she returned, something in her had changed. Her voice, once sharp and unyielding, had softened. "I'm calling for a 15-minute recess," she said quietly. Then she left again. Tears welled in more than a few eyes. A woman in the back whispered, "I don't know what just happened." Carlin leaned forward, gently touched her uncle's shoulder, and whispered something that made him smile, for the first time that day. But the silence in that room wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what had been revealed. Before the courtroom, before the cameras, Oswin Jarrett lived a quiet life on Reeves Avenue, just a few blocks from the old mill. His lawn wasn't always perfect, but the American flag on his porch never sagged. If your car broke down near his house, he'd offer you water before asking what tools you needed. He never bragged about the war. People knew he'd served in Afghanistan. They knew he came back in a wheelchair, but he didn't talk about it. When his younger sister died from a sudden stroke, Oswin didn't hesitate. He took in her daughter Carlin without question. She was only 10, sharp-eyed, observant, quiet. He made her breakfast every morning: peanut butter toast, banana slices, and half a boiled egg. She hated the egg but never told him. He only found out later when he saw her feeding it to the neighbor's dog. Their life was simple. He rolled her to the bus stop each morning, waited until the bus turned the corner, then returned home. In the evenings, she'd asked to watch old westerns. He always said yes. Oswin knew his routines. He knew which store aisles were too narrow, which curbs were too high, where the pavement tilted too much. He didn't need help. But even quiet men have limits. And someone finally pushed too far. "You said he threatened her?" "Yes," Oswin replied. "Did you use that word exactly when you spoke to the officers?" "I said he made a threat. I didn't quote him." Reggie Vallon, Oswin's public defender, leaned forward slowly, nodding with the weight of what wasn't said. We'll need the footage, and we'll need witnesses. There were people, Oswin admitted, but I don't want them dragged into this. Reggie didn't hesitate. Sir, with all due respect, they're already in it. That afternoon, Reggie sat alone in his office, lights low, reviewing the grainy footage from the store's exterior camera. The angle was bad, tilted, shaky, like someone had mounted it with duct tape and prayers. Oswin's face was barely visible, but Brett Donegan's wasn't. His mouth moved rapidly. His hands jabbed the air in front of him like punctuation marks. Carlin stood still, motionless, just behind Oswin's wheelchair. And then came the moment. No wind-up, no shouting, no rage, just one clean, controlled motion. Oswin's hand shot upward. Brett dropped. Reggie paused the frame. That's the quietest punch I've ever seen, he murmured, like a switch flipping. But in a courtroom, silence doesn't always equal innocence, and control doesn't always mean restraint. Reggie knew this wouldn't be easy. Brett had connections. The pressure was already building. Sympathy for a disabled veteran only went so far in a town where politics and perception often wrote the verdict long before the jury. Still, something about that footage lingered in Reggie's mind. Not the strike, but what came after. Oswin didn't look at Brett. Not once. His eyes stayed locked on Carlin. Like the punch wasn't about punishment, it was about protection. But that nuance wouldn't fit in a headline. By week's end, Oswin Jarrett's mugshot landed on the front page of the Dothan Register. Black and white. Poor lighting. Flat expression. Just a man in a faded t-shirt, eyes fixed straight ahead. No mention of his niece. No mention of the threat. Just the bold headline, "Veteran charged in assault outside local market." Most readers didn't get past the word assault. People who'd known Oswin for years stared at the image like it belonged to someone else. Wasn't he the guy who helped at the church fish fry? The same man who rolled through 3 Memorial Day parades even when it rained? Others didn't flinch. Not because they thought he was guilty, but because they knew how things worked in Dothan. One mistake, one moment, and everything you'd built could crumble, especially if you didn't have the right last name or shake the right hands. At the Shell station, 2 men stood near the coffee counter, half whispering. You hear what he did? Yeah, but Brett's always running his damn mouth. Can't say I blame him. Doesn't matter, you hit a man, that's a charge. You ever had your niece backed into a corner by a man twice her size? Silence. No. Then sit down. Conversations like that split the town. Barbershops, diners, laundromats. No one really knew what happened, but everyone had something to say about it. Oswin stayed off the phone, kept the TV off. Carlin stuck close. She didn't ask questions, but sometimes she stared at the front door like she was waiting for someone to knock. Reggie, meanwhile, was working overtime. He demanded body cam footage, subpoenaed audio from nearby businesses, and issued a public request for witnesses. 2 women came forward. One said she didn't hear what was said, but saw a man leaning too close to the girl. The other admitted she left quickly. Something about the situation just didn't feel right. Helpful? Yes. Enough? Not quite. Brett Donegan's family filed a civil suit, separate from the criminal case. City Hall murmured about keeping things calm, and local radio shows tap-danced around the issue, calling it a community matter without ever saying who the community was protecting. And behind the scenes, Judge Renata Graves was watching everything. She didn't talk to reporters, didn't go to community potlucks, didn't even have a Facebook page. But in her chambers, she had Oswin's military file open on her desk. 3 tours in Afghanistan, Bronze Star, combat medic, wounded during an evacuation after an IED blast. She read it twice. Then she pushed it aside and reviewed the case. Not as a veteran's story, but as a judge's burden. The footage, the police reports, the medical chart, the statements. But what caught her attention again and again was Carlin. No priors, no behavioral issues. Just a quiet teen with one handwritten letter in her school file, from a science teacher, praising her calm under pressure. Judge Graves sat with that. She had presided over gang cases, domestic violence, even a stabbing once. Those cases were noisy. This one was quiet. Too quiet. Late one night, alone in her office, she rewatched the footage again, and something in the silence unsettled her more than the punch ever could. Frame by frame, Oswin's eyes never left Carlin, not once. Even after Brett hit the pavement, he wasn't trying to win, he was trying to stop something. But in court, intent doesn't always outweigh impact. When the trial began, courtroom 2B in the Houston County Courthouse was full. Even folks who hadn't stepped foot in a courtroom in years came out, not just for Oswin, but to witness the reckoning of a moment no one could stop talking about. Carlin sat near the front with her school counselor and a kind-faced neighbor. Her backpack was half-zipped, a notebook sticking out of the side. Her sneaker tapped a quiet rhythm into the floorboard. She didn't look at the cameras. When the bailiff called the room to order, everyone stood. Judge Greaves entered like thunder in a bottle. She made no eye contact. She didn't need to. Her presence alone turned the room to stone. Reggie leaned over to Oswin. "You ready?" Oswin nodded. "Doesn't matter if I'm ready, I'm here." Reggie didn't argue. He knew better than to coach a man like Oswin. He did things on his own terms. The prosecution went first. Melinda Porras, the assistant district attorney, stood with all the poise of someone who'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror. "The facts are simple," she said. "Mr. Oswin Jarrett struck Mr. Brett Donegan with enough force to fracture his cheekbone and damage 2 teeth. This was not a fight for survival. This was not war. This was retaliation." She paused, then added, "And while we deeply respect Mr. Jarrett's military service, that service does not excuse violence in civilian life." A few heads turned. Even Judge Greaves tilted her brow slightly at that. Reggie rose slowly, adjusted his jacket, looked the jury in the eye. "My client doesn't deny that he made contact, but this wasn't a bar fight. This wasn't rage. This was a man who watched someone threaten his niece and stepped in." He gestured softly toward Carlin. "No weapon, no escalation, one strike, and then he waited for the police. That's not a man trying to run, that's a man trying to protect." Then the prosecution called Brett Donegan to the stand. He walked stiffly, a bandage still clinging to his cheek. His shirt looked fresh pressed. His face did not. He sat down, adjusted the mic, and the courtroom leaned in, because everyone wanted to hear what a punch that quiet was really about. Brett Donegan sat stiffly in the witness chair, a thin scab visible along his cheekbone. He kept his eyes low, flicking between Reggie and Judge Greaves like he was waiting for a trap to spring. "I was just talking to the girl," he said, his voice clipped and flat. "She bumped into my nephew. I told her to watch where she was going." "You didn't threaten anyone?" Reggie asked, arms crossed, tone steady. "No," Brett said. "Didn't even raise my voice." "You sure about that?" "I don't recall," Brett muttered. Reggie leaned in slightly. "You didn't block her path." "I was just standing there." "Did you step toward her?" "Not aggressively." Reggie let a beat of silence stretch. "And yet a man in a wheelchair felt compelled to strike you in defense of a 15-year-old girl?" Brett looked away. "That was his choice." No one spoke as Carlin walked to the stand. She looked even smaller beneath the weight of a courtroom full of staring eyes. Her hands clenched the arms of the witness chair. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, just braced herself. Reggie approached carefully. "Carlin," he said gently, "can you tell us what happened that day?" She looked down, then back up, her voice soft but clear. "I was going to meet Uncle Oz. I bumped into a boy near the door. I didn't see him. I said sorry. And what happened next? His uncle started yelling at me, got real close, said people like us didn't belong there." Reggie tilted his head. "People like you?" Carlin nodded. "I didn't know what he meant exactly, but it didn't feel like he was talking about shoppers." "Could you walk away?" She shook her head. "He stood in front of me. I tried, but he stepped closer." "Did your uncle say anything?" "He told him to back off, but the man didn't stop." "What did you feel in that moment?" Carlin's grip tightened on the chair arms. "I was scared." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Those 3 words landed harder than anything Brett had said all day. Oswin sat still throughout her testimony, eyes on the table, fingers folded over a crumpled tissue he never used. But the real tension wasn't in the testimony. It sat in the silence. Judge Greaves hadn't said a word about sentencing. Her expression stayed unreadable. Her pen moved without pause. No reactions, no relief. But something had shifted behind her eyes. Renata Graves had built her career on precision. Her reputation in the courtroom was ironclad, stoic, firm, fair. Raised by a man who survived Vietnam and raised her like the military had raised him. Early mornings, straight answers, no softness. Order, always order. She chose the law because it followed rules. She enforced it because it offered control. And yet this case was slowly unraveling something inside her, not because of the headlines or pressure, but because of Oswin Jarrett. That night, long after the courtroom emptied, she sat alone under her desk lamp. The courthouse echoed with emptiness. She didn't rewatch the punch. She'd seen it enough. She rewound to what came before. Carlin backing away, her shoulders bumping against a trash can. Brett leaning in, saying something just outside the audio range. Oswin still 30 feet away, watching. And then movement. Immediate, certain. No hesitation, no calculation, just instinct. She remembered something her father once told her when she was still a child, still trying to understand right and wrong. If you ever see a man protect a child without being asked, you're looking at someone who doesn't need a badge to know what's right. She hadn't thought about that line in decades. Now it was loud in her mind. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the testimony, about the punch, about the judge's long pause. Judge Graves entered, not in her robe, but in a dark blazer, her hair tied back, her glasses folded neatly on the table. A whisper rippled through the gallery. She didn't acknowledge it, just spoke. "This is a sentencing hearing," she said, "and I want to make it clear. This is not about opinions, it's about the law. But even within the law, there is space for clarity. And sometimes, clarity only comes when we stop reading files and start listening to people." She looked up directly at Oswin. "Mr. Jarrett, do you wish to speak before sentencing?" Oswin nodded, rolled forward. His voice didn't waver. "I'm not here to justify what I did. I'm not a hero. I hit a man. That's the truth. But I did it because I saw something happening in front of me I couldn't ignore." He turned toward the jury, toward Carlin. "She's my niece, my sister's only child. Her mama passed too early, and this world hasn't always been kind to girls like her, especially in places where people act like they don't belong." He paused, eyes steady. "I've lived long enough to know how fast things go bad. I've seen it, I've treated it, I've zipped the bags after. So I made a choice. And if I had to make it again, I probably still would." He rolled back. No grand gesture, no tears, just honesty, like worn steel. Judge Greaves folded her hands in front of her lips, thinking. There was no tension left in the room, only gravity. Everyone understood that whatever was on paper, this case was never black and white. She glanced once, just once, at Carlin. The girl sat holding her backpack like a shield, her hands still tucked inside her uncle's. The judge cleared her throat. "Court will resume at 10 a.m. tomorrow for final sentencing." And with that, she rose and left. Outside, the evening air pressed down like wet cloth. Reporters buzzed, but Oswin ignored them. Reggie stood beside him. "You sure you don't want to make a statement?" Oswin shook his head. "I already said what mattered." Carlin came up beside him, slid her hand into his. He didn't look down, but his fingers curled gently around hers. Tomorrow would bring the verdict, but tonight they walked into the dark together, unspoken, unshaken. The courtroom wasn't silent because of suspense. It was confusion, thick and unspoken. Even the court reporter hesitated, her fingers hovering above the keys. All eyes turned as Oswin slowly shifted. His shoulders braced, muscles strained, jaw locked tight. Inch by inch, he pushed himself upward from the wheelchair. Not a sound escaped him, not a grunt, not a groan, just raw effort carved into every shaking limb. He barely lifted off the seat before his strength gave out and gravity pulled him back down. A quiet exhale escaped his lips, and suddenly, the silence in the room wasn't about confusion anymore. It was about something else, something deeper. They weren't staring at his failure. They were witnessing the cost of trying. Judge Graves looked shaken. She stood abruptly, stepped away from the bench, and walked straight out of the courtroom without a word. No explanation, no formal recess, just gone. Reggie leaned toward Oswin and whispered, "What the hell just happened?" Oswin, still catching his breath, replied softly, "Maybe she just needed to see it." Almost 3 full minutes passed before Judge Greaves returned. Her posture was the same, but her face had shifted. Something behind her eyes had softened. She didn't look at her notes, didn't read from a ruling. She just spoke. "This court isn't only a place for laws, it's where lives are measured," she said, voice steady but raw. "Today I'm not just weighing evidence. I'm weighing intention, control, restraint." She looked at Oswin. "Mr. Jarrett, you will not serve jail time." A sharp breath escaped from Carlin. "You will complete 80 hours of community service and attend 6 months of counseling. Not because I see you as a threat, but because I believe even the strongest among us need space to heal." She paused. Then almost quietly, "Sentence delivered. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck once, but no one moved. It felt like church, like something sacred had just happened. Carlin exhaled the breath she didn't know she was holding. She leaned into her uncle's side and hugged him tight. Oswin didn't return the hug right away. He was staring at the judge who hadn't left the bench. Her hands were folded, her eyes distant, like she wasn't quite ready to stop being a judge just yet. Outside, the media was swarming. Inside, something had shifted forever. The sentence wasn't flashy, no controversy, just community service and counseling. But it was how it was delivered. The weight of the moment, it stuck. The bailiff approached and gestured toward Oswin's row. "That's it," he said. Oswin blinked. "That's it?" Reggie nodded. "Yeah, that's it." They turned to leave. But just before Oswin reached the doors, a voice called out, "Mr. Jarrett?" It was one of the jurors, a gray-haired woman in a faded floral blouse, voice soft with a southern drawl. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you did, for how you carried yourself." Oswin gave her a nod. Nothing more, but it was enough. Outside, the clouds had parted. Cameras pointed in every direction. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Vallon, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think it was fair? Was that emotional moment in court staged?" Reggie answered just one question. "Justice isn't always loud," he said. "Sometimes it's just honest." Oswin rolled past the cameras without a glance. Carlin stayed close, gripping the straps of her backpack like they might anchor her to something normal. They reached the sidewalk. Then finally she spoke. "You were shaking." Oswin managed a half smile. "Not bad for an old man, right?" She didn't laugh. "You didn't have to do that." He looked up at the sky. "Number. But some things, you try for anyway, even when you already know how they'll end." That evening, the footage of the courtroom hit every local station. Clips circulated online. Some networks cut the audio, but the image of Oswin pushing himself upward, fighting gravity, fighting history, traveled far. Some praised the judge for showing compassion. Others called it performative. Talking heads argued about judicial decorum. But none of that reached Oswin's porch. There he and Carlin shared a bowl of peach cobbler from Mrs. Ruther's kitchen, and they didn't say much. Across town, Judge Graves sat alone in her chambers long after the courthouse emptied. She held an old photograph of her father, standing in front of their childhood home, not in uniform but holding a rake. No medals, no pose. She whispered, "I saw him in that man today." By midweek, the town's attention began to shift, not away from Oswin entirely, but toward the man behind the original complaint, Brett Donegan. Until then, Brett had kept quiet. No interviews, just a civil suit filed through his family's attorney. But on Thursday morning, a local radio show aired a pre-recorded segment. Brett was asked if he had seen the video. "I did," he said. "Did you feel threatened that day?" A pause. "I don't know. One minute I was talking, the next I was bleeding." "Do you think you could have handled it differently?" Another pause. "Maybe. Maybe I came on too strong. Should have backed off. But that doesn't excuse what happened." The town shrugged. "Talking ain't a threat," someone muttered at the diner. "Yeah," said another. "But you know Brett. He talks like a boot about to drop. Oswin didn't hear the interview. Didn't care to. He spent the next week enrolling in court-mandated counseling, scheduled his volunteer hours at a youth center near Fort Rucker. He didn't complain. In fact, he welcomed the structure. Carlin went back to school. Her science teacher emailed Oswin. She's quieter now but more focused. Asked to help tutor younger kids. Said she wants them to know how to speak up for themselves. A week later, Oswin wheeled into the youth center. At first, the kids didn't look twice, but they noticed over time. He remembered their names, asked about their families, really listened. One afternoon, a boy named Raymond approached after a conflict resolution session. "You ever hit someone who deserved it?" Oswin didn't flinch. "Yeah, once. Still think about it." "You in trouble?" "I was. Not anymore. But it still matters." Raymond nodded slowly, like he understood, even if he didn't yet. Elsewhere in Dothan, life returned to routine. The courtroom stayed busy, but something lingered. Judge Graves still ruled with a firm hand, but now she paused longer, asked different questions, looked deeper. Then one quiet Saturday, a beige sedan pulled up outside Oswin's house. He was watering the grass, hose resting on his lap. Judge Graves stepped out. No press, no escort, just her. "You expecting someone?" she asked. "Nope." "I won't stay long," she said. "Just wanted to see how you're doing." Oswin stared, not cold, not warm, just steady. "I'm all right. The girl's better." She nodded. "My father served in Vietnam," she said after a pause. "Came back, quiet, like something got taken from him." "I know that silence," Oswin replied. "I misjudged you," she admitted. "When I first read your file, I thought I knew the kind of man I was dealing with." "What kind was that?" "The kind who lets bitterness become instinct." Oswin's eyes narrowed. "That happened to your father?" She didn't answer. "If you came to apologize, I don't need it," he said. "If you came to understand, that's something else." She offered a faint smile. "Maybe both." They stood there a moment longer. Then she turned and left. No handshake, no closure, just understanding. 3 months passed. The headlines faded. But in Dothan, something had changed. Oswin kept showing up at the youth center, taught kids to garden in raised beds, to breathe through anger, to speak truth, even when it's messy. He never talked about the trial. He didn't have to. The kids had seen the clip, or heard the stories, the man in the wheelchair who tried to stand. One day, a quiet girl named Jory raised her hand during a writing exercise. "Did it hurt?" she asked. Oswin didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "Yeah," he said, "but not the part you think." She nodded and went back to drawing. Carlin joined student council, gave a speech about community and courage. When she came out of the auditorium, she held up a small ribbon. "They gave me this for speaking up," she said. Oswin kissed her forehead. "Your mama would have framed that thing." As for Judge Greaves, she never mentioned the case again. But her peers noticed something. She listened more closely now, looked past what people did, and into why. She and Oswin never spoke again. But every time she drove past that red brick house on Reeves Avenue, she looked toward the porch, felt something she couldn't quite name. One Friday, Oswin received a letter from the VA routine paperwork, but at the bottom, a handwritten note from a caseworker. "Saw the clip of you in court. You did more in one moment than most people do in a lifetime." Respect Oswin folded the note and placed it in a kitchen drawer beside a photo of his sister, holding a toddler-aged Carlin. The world had moved on, but something in him had shifted. It was never really about standing. It was about being seen, showing, even without words, that dignity doesn't come from your legs, your record, or your place in someone else's system. It comes from doing the right thing, especially when no one expects it. That evening, as the sun dipped over Dothan, Oswin wheeled out onto the porch. Carlin followed, notebook in hand. "Uncle Oz? Yeah? You ever wish you'd done it different?" He looked out at the horizon, thought about it. "No," he said, "but I wish it hadn't had to happen at all." She nodded. "People still talk about it at school, but not in a bad way. They say you stood up even when you couldn't." He smiled. "Funny how truth works. Sometimes it bends, sometimes it sticks." She grinned. "Yours stuck." and they sat there in silence. The kind that doesn't need filling, because justice, real justice, isn't about punishment or mercy. It's about being forced to see what you'd rather look away from and doing something with that truth, even if it hurts. So if you're still here, listening, ask yourself, when it's your turn to be seen, what will you stand for?